Storytime, I am a bit of a whale when it comes to Genshin Impact, not in the sense that I feel the need to go out and get a copy of every single character, but if I find one that I really like, and I mean really like, chances are I'll try to pick up at least a constellation or two and maybe their signature weapon. I still don't have her weapon. I remember playing Genshin during the first couple days of its launch, loved every second of it, and just stopped for some reason. The first time I've truly fallen in love with the character was when I came back to the game after that first big break. I vividly remember it being during Child's first rerun, which was April 2021. And no, the character in question wasn't Child, although I would later get him in a second rerun. I'll give you a hint, they were extremely popular at the time both in terms of design and meta. I'm of course talking about Ganyu. It's been so long that I honestly can't remember if part of that love came from how game-breaking she was, especially with a character like Venti. However, even after she quote-unquote fell off, Ganyu remained as my favorite character in all of Genshin, and it didn't even come close. Completely unrelated, but did you know that Ganyu is the third most popular Genshin character when it comes to the amount of cultured drawings online?
Yeah, boy.
Unfortunately, I just so happened to miss her banner as it was in 1.2 and my hiatus lasted until 1.4. But the longer I waited, the more I needed this character on my account. Little did I know that I'd have to wait all the way until late January. So I made plans to livestream it on my main account, and thus evolved from a mere dolphin to whale. The idea was to end the stream with a C4 Ganyu. For some additional context, characters in Genshin have constellations. When you pull a character for the first time, they're C0, and each extra copy adds on to that, all the way up to C6. Most, if not all the time, players should stop once they get the character, but the higher constellations, the more powerful that character gets. So in my case, I had to get 5 copies of Ganyu from the banner. Since it was live streamed, I made sure to prepare more than enough wishes in advance. This was my first time whaling, so you'd imagine my surprise when I got 5 copies of Ganyu in only 270 wishes. Those who have experience with summons in Genshin Impact would know that I was incredibly lucky. At the time I did consider going all in for that C6, but after losing yet another 50-50, I called it quits. A long time passed, and while I did spend occasionally for Welkins, the only other time I whaled was whenever the top-up bonus reset. But eventually I lost interest in the game, and took the biggest break yet. I think it might have been 10 months. For a while, I genuinely thought that I was free from Genshin, that I'd never bother with it again. I mean, the longer you stop playing it, the less of a need you feel to return. Ganyu would remain my favorite character, and nobody could come close. And then Fontaine happened. Personally, I loved pretty much everything about the region. Of course, there were some bumps along the road, but not enough to hinder my experience. But more importantly, it's when the world was introduced to Furina. She very quickly became my absolute favorite character in Genshin, a title which Ganyu had held for the longest time. And it's no exaggeration to say that she is what kept me playing for so long, even during the drier periods. I ended up whaling for a second time, not spending as much as the Ganyu summons, but enough to get her C2. Ever since I whaled for Ganyu, the idea of C6'ing a Genshin character frequently surfaced. But as quickly as this thought came, it went. Despite being only 2 copies away, I was perfectly fine with a C4 Ganyu. And for the characters I was interested in, it was more of a wouldn't it be cool if I had this rather than I really want it. If I were to max out a character, it would only be once, and for a character I absolutely loved. Not only did Furina check all of those boxes, but she was also an Archon, meaning that her kit was extremely powerful. And it just so happens that she also has one of the best constellations in the game. She was already more than capable in terms of performance, but I was determined to eventually C6 her and maybe even get the weapon. Her first rerun was fast approaching, and it was around the time I made this channel, so my plans were to record the summons and make it into its own video, similar to what I did with Ganyu. One minor issue, however. Most of my spare funds had dried up at this point, and if I was planning on getting 4 more copies of Furina, it meant that I needed a lot of Primogems. And it was at the point where I was trying to cut back on spending. I still purchased Welkin to help save for her banner, but I did not want to whale for a third time. That left me with one option. Play the game normally and save as many Primogems as possible. Both Sumeru and Fontaine's maps had been left mostly unexplored, so I spent the next few weeks 100%ing every region, completing every quest, and limited time event. I even went as far as to revisit places like Mondstadt, Liyue, and Inazuma. Not a single Primogem was left behind. Except for the hangout quests, I'm still too lazy to complete them. By the time Furina's first rerun came, I had a lot. All that was left was to wish, and according to my calculations, so long as I didn't get very unlucky, I'd have enough. I got very unlucky. Now, it wasn't as atrocious as some of the stuff you see online where people manage to get on losing streaks, such as the Great Staff of Homa incident, but at the same time, I can confidently say that it was one of my worst. I lost every single 50-50. Since I needed to get 4 copies of Furina, the chances of this happening were 1 in 16, or 6.25%. On the bright side, I did get my first 5-star at around 30 to 40 pity, along with 1 back-to-back after losing my 50-50 to Jean, so it could have been worse. Let me quickly break down why the 50-50 is so important for people who know nothing about the Genshin Wish system. When you wish on a limited character banner and get a 5-star, there's a 50% chance that it'll be the one featured on the banner. If you lose this, you instead get one of the 7 standard banner characters. It also guarantees that the next 5-star you get will be that limited character. This is what players refer to as a 50-50. I should also quickly mention that as of now they have made some adjustments to the losing 50-50, however, all of my wishes and summons happened before this change. In other words, while 1 in 2 odds sounds like fantastic rates for a gacha, that's not the odds to get a 5-star. It's the odds of it being the 5-star you want. That's also why people will get so excited when winning a 50-50, even though it's a common thing. Winning a 50-50 means you save a potential 75 to 80 wishes, which is the average amount spent due to how the game works with its soft pity feature. So put yourself in my position. You spend weeks saving as many Primogems as you can from overworld chests, side quests, events, dailies, and Welkin, and by the time the banner rolls around, you have around 450 wishes worth of Primogems. And despite this, you somehow manage to lose all 4 of your 50-50s. What sucks is the fact that right before this, I used one of those Genshin wishing simulators and had insanely good luck. Those things are both a blessing and a curse, because if you're feeling that itch to pull, you can do it for free, but since it's unlimited uses, eventually you'll get extremely lucky and think that's somehow going to happen in the actual game. At the time I was also playing Honkai Star Rail along with an alt account in Genshin, and after revisiting my past summons, I realized that among all gacha games, in reality I lost 5 to 6 50-50s in a row, which is ridiculous. The worst part is that I ran out of wishes. So I had 2 options. One was to complete current events all while my daily commissions and Welkin built up. It was close enough to the point where being patient and wishing on the last few days of her banner would have guaranteed, or at the very least mitigated the amount I'd have to spend. The other option was to fold and swipe. If it weren't for the fact that this was planned to be a video, I would have done the first choice. In fact, I preferred that over the alternative, but you know how YouTube works. Being patient meant a much later upload in a very competitive market, so I folded and bought some of the first-time bonus packs. In the end, it was kind of for nothing, as that video never got up, and to be honest, it was because the whole wishing session completely ruined it for me. In total, it took around 500 wishes to get 4 copies of Furina. If we include the standard 5 stars, on average I got a 5-star in every 62-ish wishes. In contrast, it took 270 wishes for me to get 5 Ganyus and 1 Diluc, averaging at 45 wishes per 5-star. But that means each Furina cost me 125 wishes, a stark difference when compared to the average of 54 wishes for a copy of Ganyu. Long story short, something tells me that I wasn't gonna be going for a signature weapon anytime soon. Since then, I've pretty much cut off on any form of spending for Genshin. I don't even bother with things like Welkin anymore. The only time I spend money now is for the occasional battle pass in Honkai Star Rail, along with its monthly pass. Did I regret doing this? Obviously yes, at the time. But once I started using Furina in the Abyss and saw her damage output, my bitterness melted away, much like the fate of Melusan Silver. What I'm trying to say is that hindsight's always 20/20 with this sort of thing. Someone who gets super lucky with their pulls isn't going to regret it as much as a person who loses their 50/50 and needs to go to soft pity. Twice. If I had the option to go back prior to her rerun, I'd likely do it again since she is my absolute favorite character and the only one I genuinely wanted to see 6. And even if I had unreal luck similar to what happened with the Ganyu summons, I doubt I'd ever bother maxing out a character again. Like, ever. It was a one-time thing I saved for a character that truly deserved it. In a way, it's kind of fitting how I experienced the two extremes of whaling, being insanely lucky and then very unlucky. The more I think about how good my Ganyu pulls were, the less bitter I am towards the Furina banner, because when you compare the two, the good luck definitely outweighed the bad. And it's hard to feel ripped off when said character is an Archon and has arguably one of the best C6s in the game. Furina becomes the team healer, buffer, main DPS, and I can essentially slot her into any team and have fun using my favorite character. And in regards to her signature weapon, it just so happens that Shiori's is her second strongest in a DPS build, and I have both a copy of her and the weapon. Since I need a Geo unit on my team for the weapon passive to work, I can slot in Shiori with a Harbinger of Dawn. And this actually works out since I absolutely adore Shiori and wanted to use her on my main team, but was extremely underwhelmed with her kit. Now I have an excuse to use both Furina and her on my main team. The whole premise of this video was to share my experience of maxing out a character so you don't have to, but perhaps you're one of the few people who's still on the fence about whether or not it's worth whaling for a unit. The two most obvious upsides of this are that you can effortlessly clear endgame content like the Abyss, and that you can do it with your favorite character. But even if you're someone who's financially stable, unless you have more money than you can count, I'd only ever consider C6'ing a character if you really like them. The content's easy enough to be beaten so long as you properly build your teams, and in the long run it's much better to invest horizontally. Horizontally meaning more characters rather than constellations. Especially with endgame modes like Imaginarium Theater. Once you swipe, there's no going back. So if you're still indecisive about it or have any shred of doubt, don't do it. Or, at the very least, try to hold off on wishing and see if you can save.